Okay, here we are on New Year's Day. Some of you guys on iBoats were wanting to know a little bit more about how I build the big cardboard mock-ups here. You can kind of see right there's our little slide-out lounger. Here's our console under construction. And that's the one bow section with the compound curves that was a little bit of a learning lesson. And up there you can kind of see the mock-up of what I think is going to be our final front section of the boat. But anyhow, kind of get back to how I build these things, and I'm going to kind of break this up into two sections. I'm going to actually show working on some of the mock-up over there of the console, but this first part I want to go ahead and talk about some of the basics, and I'll try to break this up where you guys can skip forward if you're not interested in the basics. But one of the things I learned a long time ago was the things that are relatively apparent to me sometimes aren't apparent to other people, and vice versa. So at any rate, just kind of want to walk through some of the basics, the tools I use, and kind of how I do this stuff. Some of the stuff that I've been using here, most of you guys already have. Obviously tape measure comes in handy. This 100-foot tape measure works nice because of the fact that it's flexible and you can measure around radiuses with it. Which is kind of nice when you're trying to divide up a radius or get an overall length around a radius. It comes in really handy. This is a 60-inch aluminum straight edge. You can use a level. I like the straight edge better though. If the surface you're laying it on isn't perfectly flat, it conforms to it. So sometimes you get a level, you know, if the table or whatever you're working on has like an 1/8 inch bow or whatever in the middle, the two ends are supported and the middle's not, or vice versa, and it tries to squirm around on you. So these work really well. This here is your basic architecture student model building tool. It's a smaller version, the same thing, stainless steel straight edge. This one has a cork backing on it. Some people like that because it helps keep it from sliding around. I don't know, it's not a big deal for me, but anyhow, it seems to be a must-have for some people. On this stuff, I'm using a utility knife. Some of the finer modeling materials I'd use an X-Acto, but there's no reason to on this cardboard. You'll go through a million blades. You're still going to go through a million blades with this utility knife, so you might as well just buy a box. Also, one of the things, I cut everything out on masonite, and the reason I do that, it's not quite as hard on the blades, and the other thing is the masonite doesn't have a grain to it. So on a piece of plywood, you know, as you're cutting, sometimes a blade will get in that grain and try to follow the grain instead of your straight edge. So anyhow, the masonite works out nicely. It's cheap. It's a wearable surface. Framing square, tape. I usually use two different kinds. I use the blue tape if I want to peel it off. It doesn't peel the surface, the cardboard off as bad. Use a normal masking tape, like the Scotch brand. If it's going to be something I'm just going to leave on, it's kind of permanent because it's stickier. Do most of my layout with just a pencil. And the Sharpie comes in handy though when you're kind of just marking areas. And one nice thing about a Sharpie, you don't have to put a lot of pressure on it. You can kind of just daub it on there. And I'll show that later. I use that when I'm trying to figure out where to put glue and not put glue. Little speed square. Like I said, most of the stuff's basic. You already have it. I also use things like this hole saw, lay out smaller radiuses. Coffee can, although most of these end up being oddball size radiuses, so sometimes they're handy, sometimes they're not. It seems like they're always off slightly and not the radius you want. And of course, hot glue gun. One other thing that I've got over here, I've actually got two of them. This is a circle layout tool, and it's a real simple thing. All it is a piece of masonite, and on one end I put this nail. This is actually a sheetrock nail, which has, let's see if you can see in the focus, but it's got a really sharp edge or point here on the end of it. And I just drove it through the piece of masonite. And when I want to lay out a radius, I measure from the sheetrock nail to whatever the length of the radius is. I think that one's like an 8-inch right there. On out to however long the piece of masonite is. And drill a hole there. Then I just stick my pencil in it. I stick this in the center point of where my radius is, and then I just swing the radius. Cheap little tool. Basically made out of scrap. Works great. So, One of the biggest things though in building this kind of stuff, it's a quick method to build a prototype mock-up, but I think it's quick relative to building an actual model, or I'm sorry, an actual form itself or a mold itself. I still try to be as precise as I can with these things, and the reason why is if the angle's off ever so slightly or the length's off, it really changes things. I mean, if this angle here was off 5 degrees, by the time I got down to this point here, all of a sudden it may be way back here or way up here. So, you know, even though it's just a mock-up, I try to be as accurate as I can, and I think that's really going to be a key to people being successful with these kind of things, because otherwise you're going to mock it up based off your drawings, have some error in it, be happy with it, and then when you actually go back and build the real thing and you're dimensionally accurate, all of a sudden something won't fit, or basically it doesn't look the way you thought it was going to. So anyhow, those are some fundamentals of this kind of deal, and I'll show you a couple other things here, and then we'll get into the actual model building. Okay, this is one of the things that seems like people have the hardest time with, and it sounds kind of funny, but cutting a straight line. What I'm doing right now is I'm cutting out some of these narrow strips that I use to create the curved surfaces out of. And I'm using my long straight edge, and basically all I'm doing is lining it up on the backside. But a couple of things that people do wrong, this probably isn't so important in this particular application as is in smaller or finer, more detailed model building. But they'll lay their box knife at an angle instead of straight up and down. So try real hard to keep it straight up and down. That gives you nice, crisp, sharp corners. The other thing that a lot of people do is try to put their straight edge on here and cut all the way like that. And what will happen inevitably is the box knife will go off to one side, the straight edge will move. And there's kind of two schools of thought, I guess, and trust me, this comes from years and years of spending time in studios building models. Some people try to cut through the stuff in one cut. I don't. I think you get a better product if you use two cuts. Personal preference, but at any rate, go ahead and cut the stuff out, hold down the straight edge, and I'll make one cut, and it'll follow it up with the final cut that goes all the way through. And you'll notice that I only cut a certain length of it, and the length that I cut was what I felt like I could keep stable with the straight edge with my hand where it is, putting pressure on it. So anyhow, what I'll do is I'll slide my hand down, but I always put my other hand here, slide my hand down that I'm holding it down with, then I can make the second cut. And I just follow up and repeat that process, and by doing so, the first cut allows me to develop a straight line, the second cut allows me to cut all the way through the material. And by kind of stair-stepping my way down through there, I end up with a nice straight piece. Like I said, you can try to cut it all the way through. Some of the people I went to school with did that and were successful with it, but this is the kind of way I do it and it works for me, so whatever works best for you. Two other things I was going to show you here. We're building this particular mock-up mainly out of run-of-the-mill cardboard. I bought this stuff at a box place. Matt, I think you asked me, I think it was about $1.50 for a 4x8 sheet when I buy 10 at a time. It's cheap stuff, especially when you compare it to the price of poly or epoxy or for that matter plywood in your final product. One of the other things I've been using is mat board. And the mat board, since it's not corrugated, will bend, and so you can use it for some of the radius work. One other product that I've been using, oops, part of the old swim platform, is chipboard, and you can get this too. And it's real similar to the poster board, or sorry, not the poster board, the mat board. The difference is it's a lot more flexible. So depending on the radius, I'll use different thicknesses of this stuff. If you noticed on the, actually I'll just walk through in there to show you. On the lounger, I use both materials, or all three. I use the cardboard, of course, on the straight parts. Where we had this kind of sweeping curve, I use the mat board, and then Down here in the bottom, this is kind of a real tight curve that I was able to do out of one piece of chipboard. So anyhow, it's kind of experimenting, seeing which product works best for which application. So anyhow, hopefully that helped with some of the fundamentals, and we'll get on to actually building the model.